pink paisley in their Solstice collection. And normally I like to take the darker edge of an ombre and put it down at the bottom of the page so that it has that grounded horizon type feeling, so that the lighter end feels like the light edge. But I wanted to flip it upside down because my layout is a little bit Alice in Wonderland themed. I have these photos from an Alice in Wonderland themed tea party, and I've gone ahead and overlapped the photos like this because there are lots of other children in the photo behind here that I don't particularly want to put well, I definitely don't want in the video and don't necessarily need in my album because the people that I knew were all on this side. They're not in the background here in the photo. So that's just why I've gone ahead and done that already. So I have a close-up and then I have the picture of the two of us at the table. And I'm using this set of stamps that are tea time themed from Studio Calico, and they include the solid and the outline, which is a thing I really love in stamp sets, so I'm going to get onto that in the embellishment. So I wanted to bring in the pink, and I've trimmed some different pattern papers here just to kind of, I haven't measured them or anything, I just wanted the darker one to be a little bit bigger than the lighter one, and I wanted them to fit in this space here. I don't want to cover up too much at the top because I want to see that gradient, which I also want to have the sides free so that you can see that it is a gradient and it's not just a block of darker at the top and a block of lighter at the bottom. But I'm piling lots of stuff on top of this, so I'm not particularly worried about the dimensions there. So the lighter one is a My Mind's Eye print, and the darker one is from Echo Park. And my photos are going to go here. I'm just figuring out, do I want them up here? I think I'll split the difference and bring them down. What I'm looking for is that I don't want any of my straight edges, like the photos and the papers, to line up exactly. I want them to be offset so that you can tell I've done all that layering on purpose rather than trying to match it up, and some of them match up and some of them don't. Then I also have these two 3x4 cards. They're cut from a 12x12 sheet from Teresa Collins. I think I'm going to stick this darker one over here to the side. Maybe go underneath the edge here so that I have this bit of contrast. And then I think I'll work with this one in the embellishment, and I might cut this one up into some smaller pieces so that I can spread that little bit of navy around. And I wanted this card specifically because it mixes the cream with the white, which if I'm going to mix cream and white, which I'm going to do, I'd like to have a piece that brings those two together. And it's also here in the photos. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to go ahead and mix the two together. Now, why don't I go ahead and do the stamping so that I then have that piece to work with my embellishment and see how it goes. Like I was saying, I really like stamp sets that include a big solid piece and then an outline that goes on top of that, because it really allows for lots of techniques that make it look like you've done lots of artistic work without you really needing to be able to paint something detailed. One of my first sets of stamps I ever designed for Banana Frog, if you have the Greenwich Park set, has that same technique where there are lined designs and then the big chunky piece that goes underneath. So I'm going to be using some watercolor paper. This is 150-pound watercolor paper, but I don't have any particular love for a certain weight. That just happened to be what they had at our local bookshop when I needed some paper. And then I'm going to use this big stamp. So I'm going to go ahead and embrace that pink. I'm going to use two shades of Distress ink. The two pinks I have are Spun Sugar and Picked Raspberry. And I'm going to start with the lighter one. That's the Spun Sugar. And I'm going to ink this up. Now, I'm going to be doing a watercolor technique, so that's why I'm using Distress ink, because they work really well with water. But if you don't have Distress ink, I would just try, and as long as you're trying on a separate piece of paper like this, it doesn't matter if it all goes a little bit wrong, so you can try and see how your inks work with this technique. And because all inks are different, and I definitely don't think you need to buy every single ink out there on the market, so use what you have and see if it works, and if it doesn't, then you make the decision if you want more inks or not. Okay, so here I have my outline, or my big chunky piece stamped, and it's not perfect at all, and that's absolutely fine. I've got my paintbrush and just some plain water, and my paintbrush is falling apart. Bear with me. Okay, and then I'm just going to start painting with water onto the shape that I have stamped here. This is going to do a few things. It's going to make it paler. It's also going to even out the tone a bit where I have more ink at the edges than in the center because I didn't stamp it perfectly even. But it's also going to put down a base of the water so that I can use another color, the darker shade of pink, to do some shading without stamping it again. So I'm not going to be using that big stamp to add more color. I'm just going to use the paintbrush and the ink pad. So you can see that now it doesn't look quite so much like beads of ink on the stamp because it's softened into the watercolor paper. And I want to make sure that although I don't want the watercolor paper to be soaked with water, I do want to make sure it has enough that I'll be able to move the color around a little bit. So I don't want any spots that are too dry. So I'm just making sure I have plenty of water all along that stamped design. Then I'm going to go over to that picked raspberry ink pad. Now, the way I find is easiest to do this is to just put the ink on my acrylic block like this. And yep, my acrylic block is pretty messy, but it does clean off. The two colors that you see that are stuck there all the time are the ones that are a bit more permanent, and I need to use a solvent and go take them off, but they don't really affect how I use it, so I don't do that very often. So I've added some water to that block, and then I can just drag the color down onto the shape. And you can see how because there's water on the paper already, it's going to start bleeding to the center of the design, and it's not bleeding out where the paper is dry. So that's why you don't have to have lots and lots of painting talent to be able to make this work. You just have to follow the line with the water, and then it will do. It won't do the same thing every single time, but it will be predictable enough that you won't just end up with a big splotch of pink on your page. And what I'm doing for placement is I'm just following where the pink was naturally a little bit darker in how I stamped it. There are lots of different ways you can pick to do the placement of the darker shade, but that's one. You can also, of course, think of your light source and how the light would hit it. But when you're watercoloring it, it doesn't need to be completely perfect, so you can use any number of ways to figure out where you're going to add a little bit of darker color. Now, my paintbrush, I've rinsed the pink off, and I've just picked up plain water again. So I'm going over this with plain water. I'll do that a couple times. So it is nice to have a relatively thick watercolor paper for this, because you can see I'm putting quite a lot of water into the paper, and I don't want it to just shrivel up. You can, I don't know if you can tell it, it's buckling just a tiny bit, but it's really minuscule. It's not a problem at all, and once it's dry, it will flatten out again. So now I'm just painting with the water, just going over that to try and blend out these bits of dark, but I don't want to lose that nice bit of light there in the middle, so I don't want to pull too much. And then if it gets too wet, you can use a paper towel to pick up a little bit, or you can dry the brush and you can just place the brush and it'll soak it back up. Or you can just wait now if it's not too wet. If it's not too wet, you can just wait for it to dry, or you can do it with a heat gun. It's completely up to you which you prefer, but I would just say if you're going to use the heat gun, you don't want any droplets of water, of course, because once you put the heat gun on, they may the wind may catch them and go across the page, and then your lovely design will have things that go outside the line. So either way it will work, and you just want it dry before you go on to the next step. My cup is dry now, and you can see I've been able to keep a little bit of the lighter color there, and then I obviously have the darker shading in certain areas. And then I'm going to add my outline, the design stamp, in black pigmento ink over the top. And it's not a set where you have to line it up perfectly. It actually works really well if it's just a little bit offset. And I'm also going to add in the little Alice in Wonderland text at the bottom too. It's curved just a tiny little bit, so it fits really nicely at the bottom of the saucer there. That's my stamped embellishment. I'm going to go ahead and cut this out into a shape that I can use on my layout and start putting it together with the other paper elements. I've cut that out just loosely, and I'm going to add just a little bit of black ink to the edges so that I have a little bit of shading there. And then I can start to use that as an embellishment. I'm thinking I may actually put this right over the top of this little flower, because that little flower doesn't particularly fit my theme, but I really did like the saturation of this navy and the nice white text on the navy. So maybe it's going to go right about there. And that means I can place it there and figure out where everything else is going to go on my page. Thinking about it, I'd really like something where the coloring matches that painting that I did on the cup. So I'm going to use a punch to do a matching simple heart. So this is my Martha Stewart heart punch, and I've just punched out a piece so that I have a little stencil. And then I'm using that same watercolor paper and the same two ink pads. So I'm going to start with my spun sugar and put it straight onto the watercolor paper. And then I'm going to repeat those same steps that I used before. So picking up just plain water on my brush. And I'm going to make it into a bit more of a heart now. Okay, and then over to my picked raspberry, that hot pink color. Put it back on my acrylic block, which I'd already cleaned away, but get a bit more of that. Paint it back in. I'd really like this one to coordinate with this one in the black on top of the pink as well, but obviously I've done this one with a punch, not with a stamp, so I don't have a stamp that perhaps works perfectly there, so I'm going to use that as my spot for the date, and I'm just using my date stamp with the same black ink, and go across the widest part of the heart to stamp that, and then cut out the heart. And this way I end up with quite an abstract heart, which I'm happy with for this page, but say it went a bit too abstract and I couldn't tell that it was a heart, I can actually go back in with my punch and just go back and do the punched shape instead. And I'm just looking, I think I may have liked this better if I'd left it as a rectangle, because I really like these little splatters over to the side. But it's a bit late for that, so I'm just trying to see here. I might just cut out one side of the heart and leave the rest as a rectangle for now. Go. So now I have two pieces to coordinate, and I'll just add my black ink to this one too. I may change the shape and size of this, but we'll see how we go when it all comes together on the layout. I'm going to attach the teacup straight away since I had that gut instinct of where I wanted it to go, and using pop dots for that, foam squares, and that way it'll have that bit of dimension and layering, and I can still tuck other smaller pieces behind it if I need to, but of course I have this fun part where I have to get the backs off the foam squares. Now, just get this to overlap just a little bit. And then I can come over to this side and figure out where I want that heart shape to go. And I think it might work just tucked behind there. And I'll tuck this piece here. So maybe I'll move this up a little bit because this little pattern paper piece would tuck in there, but I want to make sure I'm not covering that up. Yeah. So this little box is from an older crepe paper design that just happened to be sat on my desk and fit the colors and the theme. Yep. And I like the idea of just repeating those little staples there. So we can see if this will reach. Yep. Add a bit more adhesive to keep all that in touch. Now, I'm not loving this straight edge here, so I think I'll add some more embellishment there before I go any further. I like the colors and the tones in this particular set. This is from Crepe Paper Notes and Things, so I thought there might be something that would work well here. Or, I also have my navy blue card. I think I need some different color here before I layer this in, because then I've just got all that white and cream together. I need a little bit of contrast. I wonder if this pink one is going to be big enough. Yeah. So that's quite pale, so I'll add ink to the edge of this one. And again with the foam squares, pick it up a little bit. And then I can start to tuck in something like maybe that navy blue label below there. So I think that still reads as a heart shape. It does to me anyway. If it doesn't to you, then do something different on your layout, of course. I'm going to cut out the navy blue label, and I'm going to save this little line to use elsewhere in the layering. And working in this spot over here, it's actually a little bit big, so I can just take part of it, bring that up underneath these layers here. And I can use that other little piece on the other side to make everything coordinate. Just got popped out I needed to pull up there. So I still have that little bit of edge there, so you can still see the gradient down the side. And just go ahead and start a little grouping up here at the top. And I'm going to add my journaling in this space. So I thought just down here at the bottom edge, I could add a little bit of the navy and the two pinks, and that will bring all my paper back down here and have just a tiny little bit of embellishment, and will frame my journaling even though I'm going to journal right onto the back. Then to bring in some more embellishment, I'd like to return up here where I'd popped that little label so that I knew I could come back to it. Had a look at the matching ephemera pack for the Notes and Things collection, and it had this little set of 2 tickets put together that are in that fuchsia pinky color. So I thought that would work well to emphasize the fact that it was 2 of us that went to the tea party. So I thought I could start with that, just adding a little bit of black to the edges to make it coordinate with some of those other pink elements. And then there was also in the ephemera pack a vellum version of this star sticker that I'd used at the bottom. So I think that needs to come up here, but it needs something behind it, so I'll wait before I adhere that. And I also just had a little bit of scrap from the watercolor paper with the inks, so I punched that into a little pinked circle to match that one. I'm just looking where's the best place for that to go. I think I'll put that one on top rather than underneath, but it does need the ink along the edges to match the others. And I'll bring that darker pink over on the same side that it appears in the other pieces, so it's on the left there, it's going to be on the left here. Then that vellum star works on top of that. I was just seeing how I might adhere that, and I think I might bring the staple in again, but I'm just going to wait a second to make sure that I'm perfectly happy with that. I wanted to add something with the day of the week, and I have this little chipboard piece that has the Monday. I've already put the date, so I don't need to repeat that over here, but I'd like to have the day as Monday. I have my navy up there at the top. It'd be nice to have a little piece here just to have a little bit of a softer edge there. It's in there at a little bit of an angle. And I'll get some staples to add this on top of that little circle. And my last little finishing touch is going to be some gold sequins. So I'm going to use just a little bit of liquid adhesive. Drop little spots where I can put them. And I'll add 3 in each little embellishment grouping. And once those sequins are nice and stuck and the glue is all dried, I think I might look at my stamps to see if there are any tiny words that might fit nicely in these little windows of space. Thanks so much for watching. I'd love for you to stop by Shimelle.com today. There are a whole bunch of different ideas for using this stamp on cards, Project Life pockets, and obviously a 12 by 12 page. I'd love for you to stop by. Thanks, and I'll see you soon.